After Dad died and Mom remarried, my new stepfather would only allow her to take one son with them to the city. My brother begged me to stay so he could go with them. I'm floating, feeling completely weightless and terrified. It's like that moment when you fall off a high place, that split second of panic, but it's going on forever. My body's shaking, I can still feel it. Then, I hear this voice, super familiar, and it yanks me back to reality. Bro, you're smart and strong. You could totally make it here in the village, but me? Without Mom? I'd be a goner. It's my little brother, Leo, and seeing his face, bam, I'm back. I know exactly where I am and what's happening. This is insane. Have I seriously gone back in time? My heart's going a mile a minute just thinking about it. See, this happened before. Our dad died, Mom remarried, and the new stepdad, Richard, would only let her bring one kid along. Leo, he got down on his knees, begging me to let him go with them. He laid it on thick, saying I was this tough, brainy farmer type, and he'd just wither away without Mom's care. Leo's my twin, just 10 minutes younger. And, I mean, how could I watch him suffer? So yeah, I caved. I told him to go. I stayed in our little village, figuring I'd be okay. Big mistake, huge. What I didn't know was that Leo going with Mom was just the start of my personal, never-ending nightmare. At first, Mom sent me money, for living expenses. But then the person sending the cash changed. It was Leo. And the amount? It went way down, like from $500 a month to $500 every 3, maybe 5 months if I was lucky. Leo claimed Richard's family wasn't doing so hot, and that was all they could spare. But that wasn't even close to enough to cover tuition and, living. Luckily, Richard had left me this old, run-down house, so at least I had a roof over my head. But I was young, and I had to start working now. Because I was always underfed, I was sick all the time. I couldn't even make it to the college entrance exams. Eventually, I just had to drop out of school. It wasn't that I didn't want to go, it was that I literally couldn't. Later, I found out the truth. Richard's family wasn't poor at all. Leo was living the high life. Fancy stuff. Video games, a huge house, a car. Everything I could only dream of. But Leo? He didn't appreciate any of it. He got totally obsessed with this online streamer, this girl named Willow. He blew all his money and even maxed out his credit cards, sending her gifts. Richard found out, tried to talk to him multiple times. Useless. Finally, he had to cancel Leo's cards. And you know what that idiot did then? He set his sights on the old house Richard had left me. When I found out he'd sold my house, I literally lost my balance while I was working, fell from way up high and, well, that was it. But this time I wasn't going to let Leo take everything that was mine. I looked at Leo, ice cold, and said, Bro, we're both Mom's kids. Let her decide. Mom. She looked totally torn, staring at me and Leo. Leo, he's quick, though. I'll give him that. He switched tactics, all sweetness and light, linking arms with Mom and saying, Mom, Ethan's always been the smart one. Even if he's on his own, he'll be fine. But me, I'm not healthy, and I really need you. You can't just leave me here. In my past life, Mom didn't even hesitate. I'd always helped her out, with chores, taking care of Leo when she was working. She knew exactly what Leo was like. It wasn't easy for her to marry into a rich family, and if she brought along a useless person like me, Richard might look down on her. If I was insistent on sending Leo off, she probably thought of it as an easy decision. Leo probably already knew what Mom would say. He shifted his focus to Richard, grabbing his hand, all cute and saying, Dad, I'm a really good son. Unlike my brother, he's always been difficult, arguing with Mom, worrying her. If you take me, I promise I'll be good. I was floored. I couldn't believe Leo would lie like that, try to make me look bad. And the way he called Richard Dad so easily. It made me sick. Richard, he didn't really know us. He hadn't known Mom for long. Mom had hidden the fact that she had 2 sons from him, only telling him after they got married. He was angry, sure, but He didn't bring up divorce. Instead, he said he'd only take one kid. I guess that was his way of punishing Mom for keeping it a secret. I wasn't like Leo, all smooth talk and charm. I was always the quiet one, and the grown-ups usually preferred Leo. But what Leo didn't know was that I'd literally crawled back from hell. I could play these games too. I just hadn't wanted to. I saw Richard's expression soften a little, so I stepped up, copying Leo's tone. Dad, I've always been the one studying hard, working hard. I've always helped Mom. Leo's been protected by us, but it's time for him to learn to be independent. Leo glared at me, like pure poison in his eyes. He gritted his teeth, then immediately put on this pathetic act. Bro, why are you trying to take everything from me? Haven't I given you enough ever since we were kids? Now I just want a home, a father, and you're doing this? Even though Richard didn't know the whole story, with me and Leo going back and forth, he probably started to realize something was up. I wasn't going to fall into Leo's trap. Instead, I looked at Mom, like I needed her help. Leo could cry? I could cry too. When we were young, no matter how tough things were or how unfair it felt, I never cried. And because of that, I ended up dealing with even more unfairness. And, yeah, it seemed like Mom favored Leo. If it weren't for the whole Richard might look down on her thing, she probably would have chosen Leo without a second thought. The truth is, all this talk of family, blood ties, it's all just people looking out for themselves. And Mom, she's no different. I already had a bit of an advantage over Leo, and now I was going to use it. Leo probably never imagined that his non-competitive older brother, who never fought for anything, would actually compete with him. I looked up at Mom, eyes full of tears, looking all fragile and sad, and said, Mom, I'm not afraid of working hard with you. I just want to be with you forever. You know, my grades have always been the best, and if I leave you, I'll probably have to drop out. Leo's different. He never liked studying. Don't worry, I'll study hard, and after I graduate, I'll make money and take care of him. Mom never mentioned Richard's family background, so neither Leo nor I knew he was loaded. But Leo had asked around and lied to me, saying Richard was poor and that he just wanted to be with Mom. In my past life, I didn't care about fighting for things. I figured hardship was everywhere. Since Leo loved being with Mom so much, I let him go. If I hadn't lived through all this before, I'd still be fooled by him. The whole I can't live without Mom thing? Just an excuse. Leo just wanted to enjoy the life of a rich kid. Richard looked surprised, about to say something, but Leo cut him off. Bro, what are you talking about? Saying you want to live a hard life? Dad's so successful, are you cursing him to go bankrupt? Bro, you're really something. Then he turned to Richard, all sugary sweet. Dad, don't be mad at my brother. He's always been a big talker. I've gotten used to it. Now Leo wasn't even trying to pretend anymore, but that actually worked in my favor. I just smiled faintly and said, But you said we lived a hard life with Mom. I'm willing to endure hardship. As soon as I said that, Leo probably realized he'd messed up. He went quiet for a second, then quickly changed his tune. No, I just heard that Dad's life is good. I knew Leo too well. Once his lies were exposed, he'd just babble. Now, no matter what he said, it just sounded like excuses. Richard's expression got darker. He looked at me and asked, Are you really willing to endure hardship with us? Tears still welling up, I nodded. Mom's worked hard for both of us her whole life. I just want to be with her and make things easier for her. When she heard that, Mom smiled, relieved, and Richard nodded, like he approved. Leo glared at me, but I looked down, hiding the dark thoughts in my eyes. In the end, Richard decided to take me with him, leaving the old house to Leo. Leo knew it was a done deal, but he still wanted to make things difficult for me. As we were about to get in the car, he pretended to be sad, grabbing my hand tightly and raising his voice on purpose so Mom and Richard could hear. He said, "Bro, I'm really happy for you. Just hope you don't cheat in the city. It would ruin Dad's reputation." Leo knew Richard liked me mainly because of my good grades, but he had to hit where it hurt. If this were the past, I would have panicked, tried to explain myself, falling right into his trap. But now, I just smiled calmly. Leo was being way too obvious. Even if Richard believed him for now, he'd still have doubts. And, eventually, the truth would come out. Leo, seeing that I wasn't getting angry, gritted his teeth. He leaned in close, whispering, just loud enough for me to hear. "I'm telling you, you're enjoying a good life with Mom now. If you don't send me money, I'll ruin your happy life. If I can't have it, you won't either." I patted Leo on the shoulder and said loudly, "Little brother, how can you make me deceive Dad for money? We're still young, we should focus on studying. Don't worry, I'll work while studying and make money for you." As soon as I finished, everyone went silent. All eyes were on Leo. His face turned bright red. He pointed at my nose, but he couldn't come up with a single thing to say. I grabbed Leo's finger and comforted him. "Bro, you have to study hard. We'll work hard together. Even though I left with Mom, you're still my brother. No matter how bad my life gets, I won't let you suffer. After all, you've been spoiled by Mom and me since you were little. Wasn't Leo just trying to ruin my reputation in front of Richard? Then why couldn't I fight back? I was simply using his own tactics against him." Richard looked at Leo with disappointment, let out a deep sigh, and then drove away. In the car, Richard suddenly said, "How about I give him 10,000 yuan a month for living expenses?" Mom didn't protest much or say anything, but instead she turned to me and asked, "Ethan, what do you think?" I remembered in my previous life, the living allowance was only 500 yuan a month, and I had complained to Mom about it for a long time. Back then, I just thought Mom wasn't doing well at Richard's place, and taking Leo along probably made things even harder, so I didn't say much. But now, I understood. In my past life, when Richard proposed this idea, Mom had first asked Leo for his opinion. My gaze suddenly became cold. Growing up, I never claimed to have treated Leo like royalty, but whenever someone else had something, even if I had to grit my teeth, I would fight to get it for him, even at the cost of sacrificing myself. But I never expected that Leo would hate me to this extent. At this thought, I clenched my back teeth, forcing a smile, and said, "However, 10,000 yuan is too much. Leo is still a child, and without any family around to keep him in check, he might develop bad habits when he grows up. That would ruin him. Besides, Leo is in the village, so his expenses are low, and Grandma is there to look after him. In my opinion, 500 yuan a month should be enough." Mom hesitated for a moment, looking at me with an expression of disbelief. Maybe in her eyes, I was still the older brother who loved Leo the most. Richard cast an appreciative glance at me. Taking advantage of the moment, I added, "Mom and Dad have already had it hard enough. I've become a burden to you. I'll work hard to make money for Leo." When my mom heard this, she finally sighed with relief. After my repeated assurances and insistence, Mom and Dad finally agreed to give Leo 500 yuan a month for his living expenses, and the moment I stepped into Richard's house, the huge villa still left me a bit stunned. In my previous life, I only knew Richard's family was wealthy, and that was after I had dropped out of school and started working. It was Leo who flaunted it to me every day that I found out. Seeing all of this, my emotions were still hard to calm. But in front of Richard, I couldn't let myself seem too shocked or exaggerated. The reason Richard canceled Leo's card in the past was because Leo had been spending recklessly, not to mention his vanity. As it turned out, Richard didn't like such children. Moreover, no matter how much he loved Mom, he could never fully accept a useless burden. So I had to prove my own worth. Of course, I also needed to express my gratitude to Richard. Thus, When I noticed that Richard was secretly watching me, I slowly let the tears fall. Richard asked in surprise, "What's wrong?" Wiping my tears, I replied, "I thought you and Mom were living a hard life. This is too good. I can't bear to see the two of you working so hard just to make ends meet. It's really too good." Richard patted my head with a satisfied smile. "Ethan, you're really understanding, and you care about us." When Richard motioned for someone to take me to my bedroom, I was trembling as I looked around at the room full of luxury brands and the bedroom I had never even dared to imagine. Even after living 2 lives, I had never had my own room. In my previous life, although Richard left me the old house, my grandmother lived there with me, and my uncle's family moved in too. My cousin slept in what should have been my room, my uncle and aunt had the master bedroom, my grandmother also had a fairly large room, and I was the only one sleeping in the storage room. I wasn't as ruthless as Leo. In my past life, when he set his sights on the old house, he didn't hesitate for a second and directly kicked out my uncle's family. At that time, I thought it didn't matter if I suffered a little. At least I could go home and have a warm meal. I had always endured, preferring to suffer myself so that others could live better. But why, after repeatedly sacrificing, did those who never gave anything still live better than me? This time, I wouldn't be so foolish. I had had enough of the hardships of working on construction sites. That evening, Leo angrily called me. He shouted, "Ethan Ito, why are you so vicious? You're blocking my path to becoming a rich kid. You deserve to die." I had already anticipated that Leo wouldn't let me off easily. Even though things were already settled, he wouldn't let me have a moment of peace. He asked, "That old man said he would give me 10,000 yuan a month for living expenses. How did it turn into 500 yuan when it came out of your mouth?" Before I could respond, Leo went off on his own, ranting into the phone. I really didn't expect that Mom would tell Leo the truth. It seemed that in her heart, Leo was still her favorite. If this were the past, maybe I would have felt sad. I still remembered in my previous life when I was forced to drop out of school and work on a construction site. I just wanted to buy an electric bike for commuting, so I gathered the courage to call Mom and ask to borrow money. At that time, she just coldly said, "You're already grown up. Besides, didn't your stepfather leave you a house? You shouldn't be so greedy." Even after I died, Mom went so far as to help Leo escape public condemnation, testifying that I had taken my own life. I should have realized a long time ago that Mom and Leo were both selfish and self-serving. Now that I had been reborn, I wouldn't expect anything from her anymore. The fact that she told Leo the truth was just so he wouldn't blame her later. I had to admit, playing the blame someone else game was done well. I calmly replied to Leo, "First of all, my surname is Miller now. You can call me Ethan Miller or Young Master Miller. Secondly, yes, I did this. If you don't want me to live well, why should I let you? By the way, you better focus on yourself. After all, in a few days, you won't even be able to keep the house." With that, I hung up the phone. Unfortunately, Leo hadn't been reborn like I had. If he had, I would have spared no effort in describing all the hardships and pain I had endured in my previous life, making him slowly feel the torment. Since that wasn't possible, let him be the frog in boiling water. As for why Mom didn't secretly give Leo more money, I knew she didn't dare. Now that we were living in Richard's house, everything we wore and used was provided by him. Mom wasn't stupid enough to do something like that. After all, helping her ex-husband's son would be humiliating. And I didn't have to worry about what Mom would do. We just needed to mind our own business. What I wanted was to gain Richard's favor. As for family, blood ties, I didn't want any of that. I only wanted money. Richard transferred me to the best high school. Though it was already the 3rd year of high school, I had been attending school in my hometown, where the teaching quality was somewhat lacking. As a result, my midterm exam scores weren't ideal. To my surprise, when I returned home with a nervous heart, I found that Leo was already at my house. I was a bit startled, but Leo said with an air of pride, "Hey bro, I came to see you. I heard your midterm results came out, and I'm here to report my scores to Mom as well." I don't know why, but I felt something was off about Leo's gaze. In the past, although his eyes always showed scheming, there was still a kind of foolishness to him. Both Mom and Richard were there, and Richard seemed more interested in my results. He asked me to bring out my report card. As I hesitated, Leo quickly ran over, snatched my bag, and dumped its contents onto the floor. He found the report card and handed it to Richard. Richard's face immediately darkened when he saw my significantly declining scores. At that moment, Leo looked at me triumphantly and said, "See, bro, I told you, study seriously. You insisted on cheating, but now that you're at this school, the supervision is strict, and you couldn't cheat. Now look, you've embarrassed Mom and Dad." Unlike me, although I didn't come first in the class, I made it into the top 10. Leo proudly handed his report card to Richard, as if presenting a treasure. Richard had a somewhat complex expression. He glanced at me, then at Leo, his eyes filled with unspoken disappointment. I was a bit curious. Leo had never been a good student, either second to last or last in class. How could he suddenly make it into the top 10? There had to be something fishy going on here. Before I could speak, Leo seemed to anticipate what I wanted to say and continued, "Mom, Dad, I know you think my brother is better than me, but I've been working hard. Don't worry, I'll get a good rank in the college entrance exam, and maybe then I can return to be with you." I never expected that Leo's real purpose for coming here was this. Mom looked at Leo, her eyes lighting up with hope, and hugged him with a look of deep affection. "You really are a good son." Then she turned to my stepfather with a pleading look. "Honey, look, they are twins. You wanted the most outstanding child to help you in the future. How about this? Let's wait until their college entrance exam results come out and then decide who to keep. For now, let's let Leo stay at home." As Richard seemed torn, Leo squeezed out a few tears and, in a pitiful voice, said, "Dad, you don't know. My uncle and aunt have taken over my room. Now I don't even have a space to study at night. Please, let me stay here. I won't disappoint you." With that, Leo threw a provocative glance at me. In the end, Richard agreed to my mom's suggestion. That night, Leo entered my bedroom, looking around as if reminiscing, and said, "Ah, I miss this place. It used to be mine. But Ethan, don't think you're the only one who's been reborn." I just gave a faint smile. From the moment Leo showed up in Richard's house, I had a hunch that he had returned from his previous life. Otherwise, given his childhood courage, he would never have dared to do this. Leo slowly walked toward me and said, "My dear brother, only you, a fool, wouldn't use the situation with uncle and aunt to your advantage. You let them bully you. I'm telling you, my goal was never that broken house. I'm here to take back what belongs to me. Do you think your 2 lifetimes of memories will help you drive me away?" Fool. Leo didn't care how I responded. Maybe he enjoyed seeing the dumbfounded expression on my face, so, after boasting for a while, he left. My expression gradually shifted from shock to a smirk. That's right, I did it on purpose. I knew Leo had returned. I had heard that he had accidentally fallen from the 2nd floor of the school, and when he woke up was mumbling in a delirious state, "I'm going to give Willow gifts. I'm the rich 2nd generation." From that moment, I knew Leo had returned. So I deliberately failed my exams to make Leo think I was struggling with the new environment. Besides, in my previous life, I dropped out before I even took the college entrance exam, while he came back with memories of our past lives, so he was confident. But Leo forgot one thing. I didn't drop out because I couldn't learn. It was because I didn't have the money for school. I had to make sure Leo came back. How could I execute my revenge if he wasn't within my sight? Since Leo returned, we've been going to and from school together every day. Although Leo seemed to be working hard, with his desk lamp always on at night, I knew better. He wasn't studying. He was either watching live streams of beautiful women or reading comics. However, this behavior actually earned him even more affection from Richard, while I continued to keep a regular routine, going to bed early and waking up early. The knowledge from my previous life was already firmly ingrained in my mind. One weekend, Leo suddenly burst out of his room, tears streaming down his face. He rushed to hug Mom's arm tightly, his gaze fixed on Richard. Choking on his words, he said, "Dad, Mom, my room is so small. I saw mice, and it's so damp. Could you please let me have another room?" It was obvious that Leo wanted to switch rooms with me. Even though Richard lived in a mansion, apart from the master bedroom and my room, which were spacious and sunny, the other rooms were all guest rooms. Richard glanced at me hesitantly. Mom immediately made the decision and said to me, "Ethan, you know your brother's health hasn't been good. He needs sunlight. Besides, he's been studying so hard lately. It doesn't matter where you sleep, so just let him have the room." Leo gave me a smug smile. I had long since given up hope on Mom. The way she spoke showed that she was accustomed to me always yielding to Leo. I didn't protest, in fact. It gave me a chance to expose Leo's fake effort. So I nodded obediently. Mom didn't thank me for it. I knew she had already planned this. They were working together to push me out of the house. If Richard hadn't initially had a good impression of me and a neutral one of Leo, and if he hadn't given me a second chance after my poor test scores, I would have been replaced by Leo already. But I knew I only had one chance to make a mistake. A businessman's tolerance isn't limitless. Then I led Mom and Richard into Leo's room. I casually opened the desk drawer and found a hidden compartment. When I opened it, I found comic books, lots of them, including many rare editions that were worth thousands, books that were practically impossible to get without spending a small fortune. As I gasped in surprise, Leo panicked and rushed over, trying to stop me. Perhaps he was so pleased with himself for taking back what he thought was rightfully his that he momentarily forgot about the other things he was hiding. But it was too late. I covered my mouth and said, "Wow, brother, you have so many comic books. I really envy you. All I have are test papers and exercise books, and yet you even have time to read comics." "Did you spend all your pocket money on this? Oh my gosh, some of these are even rare editions. I'm so jealous." Mom and Richard stood by my side. Surely this was evidence enough, right? The comic books clearly showed signs of being flipped through, and the reading volume in just 2 months was enough to prove that Leo hadn't had time to study. Moreover, Richard had increased his allowance significantly recently. Although he was wealthy, he wasn't a fool. That wasn't all. I also noticed Leo's phone charging on the side. Although it was on silent, I could still see a Willow live streamer shaking her hips on the screen. So I casually picked up the phone and shook it lightly in front of Richard, pretending to be shocked. "Brother, you can't be watching this kind of borderline content. You're still so young, and this kind of vulgar live stream will negatively affect your growth and health." As I spoke, I clicked on the leaderboard and saw his name brightly displayed at number 5. He must have spent at least 50 to 60,000 yuan on this. Although Richard was a bit older, his company was in the internet business, so there was no way he didn't know that Leo was spending money on live stream gifts. I knew that once Leo let his guard down, he wouldn't be able to hide his true nature. It was only a matter of time before he slipped up. What I needed to do was to make him relax, to let him think everything was going according to his plan. Or else how could he have exposed his true colors? Leo panicked, quickly grabbing the phone from my hands and glaring at me with malice. Then, in a hurry, he tried to explain to Richard, "Dad, you're mistaken. This isn't mine. I was just helping my brother out. The gifts were from him." Such a clumsy performance couldn't fool anyone. But what I didn't expect was that Mom slapped me across the face, stuttering as she scolded me. "How could you let your brother do this for you, and then frame him like that? Where would he even get the money?" Maybe Mom had forgotten that when Leo lived at our hometown, she didn't dare give him extra money for fear of angering Richard. But since we moved here, she had withheld my allowance and given it all to Leo. Where else could Leo get money if not from her? I covered my stinging cheek and said, feeling wronged, "Mom, I really didn't do anything. I don't even have any pocket money. How could I have money for gifts?" Richard grew suspicious and asked Mom for her phone to check the transaction records. Mom hesitated, too guilty to hand it over. But seeing Richard's expression change, she finally relented and shakily handed him the phone. Richard opened the transaction history and, as expected, saw that the money he had transferred to Mom was almost entirely given to Leo, with only a few hundred given to me as pocket money here and there. I couldn't help but smile faintly, just waiting for the show to unfold. Richard threw the phone back to Mom, coldly sneering, "Well, well, you're Ethan's real mother, yet you're so biased toward your son." When I heard those words, something inside me cracked. Yes, we're both her sons, so why was she so biased? Was it because I always let Leo have his way? Was it because the crying child always gets the candy? I didn't know, but what I did know was that Richard, a complete outsider, was speaking up for me. Even though we weren't blood-related, and he only needed to choose one good foster child, he still defended me. My heart ached, and without realizing it, tears began to fall. Mom was silent, chastised by Richard, who decisively said, "I don't see any reason to switch rooms. As for the pocket money, I will personally transfer Ethan's share to him from now on." Looking at Richard's back, my vision gradually blurred. Although he was a bit older and didn't have children of his own, he truly treated my mother well. In the previous life, even though he had no intention of taking me in, he still left me a room. Maybe it wasn't because he wanted to keep his distance. Perhaps from the beginning, he chose to only bring one child to avoid the kind of scheming and rivalry that was happening now. In my previous life, I couldn't understand this, but now I realized that Richard once had a brother, and they had fallen out over an inheritance dispute, severing all ties. So Richard was afraid. But I wanted to tell him that some people are born never satisfied, and they can't appreciate the bond of family. Leo and my mother glared at me harshly, and then Leo angrily shouted, "Is this what you wanted, Ethan? Let me tell you, I won't back down. You're the one who needs to leave." I didn't respond. There was no point in wasting my breath on someone like Leo. After a month of hard work, the long-awaited college entrance exam finally arrived. Richard took a day off and insisted on personally escorting both Leo and me to the exam hall. Before we left, Mom kept reminding Leo about various details, even stuffing some hot buns and eggs into his bag. When it came to me, Mom casually threw a bread roll at me without saying a word. Richard seemed to notice my disappointment, and immediately had the maid put the breakfast he had prepared for him into my bag. The long-lost fatherly love, even though Richard wasn't my biological father. He treated me better than my real one ever had. Before leaving, Mom exchanged a glance with Leo, seemingly communicating something. At first, I didn't understand what was going on, but when I took out my exam registration card, I realized it had been switched. That's when I understood. Mom genuinely wanted me to leave. Even though I could understand her favoritism towards Leo, wanting him to stay with her, I couldn't accept the idea of her sacrificing my future for his. Mom then sent me a message with an unmistakable tone of threat. It read, "I'm telling you, write Leo's name on the exam paper. I'm your mother, and I have the right to decide everything for you." Luckily, I had long seen through my mother's true nature, or else I would have been deeply hurt. In my previous life, I had already endured unbearable pain, while she never once considered any way to keep me around. But as soon as Leo played the victim, my mom would instantly surrender. I sent the screenshot to Richard. Even though he had already left in the car, upon receiving my message, he immediately turned the car around and returned. He appeared just in time as we were about to enter the exam hall. Richard grabbed Leo by the arm and forcefully demanded that he return my exam registration card. Just a second ago, Leo had been smugly whispering in my ear, "Ethan, you think you can surpass me? Not a chance. I have countless ways to make you leave this house." But now, Leo was completely panicking. In order to avoid upsetting Richard, he pretended to be apologetic and said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I was careless and mistook the name on the exam card." Richard was unmoved and coldly said, "The person you should be apologizing to is your brother." Leo was humbled, and Richard comforted me. "Focus on your exam. Don't stress." I wasn't sure how much genuine affection Richard had for me, but in this world, it seemed that genuine feelings weren't so important. What mattered was that I had to give it my all, become a valuable person, and prove I was worthy of staying by his side. I nodded. Just then, the bell rang, and Richard left. Leo shot me a venomous glance. During the long wait for the exam results, my mom and Leo were far from peaceful. They either glared at me or threw cold words my way, as if it was unforgivable that I didn't swap places with Leo. When the results came out, Leo scored over 500 points, but my score was hidden. Leo proudly skipped in front of Richard, saying, "Brother, could it be that your score got cancelled because you cheated? What's with you always trying to take shortcuts?" My mom immediately took a jab at Richard. "I'm sorry, dear. It's my fault for not teaching Ethan properly. I've embarrassed you. I'll make him move out now. Even though Leo scored over 500 points with some extra effort, he can retake the exam and get into Capital University." I said nothing, just quietly watching this mother-son duo show off. My stepfather didn't speak either, but I could feel him observing me, watching to see how I would handle this unforeseen pressure. Perhaps my calmness pleased him, as he cleared his throat and coldly laughed. "Only high scores would be hidden. You two really don't get it, do you?" Both Mom and Leo exclaimed in disbelief. "Impossible! Ethan always failed before. How could he have a high score?" Richard sneered. "Can't you see that Ethan is controlling his scores? Every subject is just above the passing line, not 1 point more, not 1 point less. But you, my dear son, are copying others. Do you really think I'm blind?" I hadn't expected my stepfather to be so sharp, completely aware of both Leo and my situations. I couldn't help but admire him even more. Leo, guilty and anxious, couldn't look Mom in the eye. No matter how much she questioned him, he refused to speak. It wasn't until the phone call from Capital University came through that Mom heard firsthand that I could choose between 2 top universities in the capital. That was when she completely collapsed onto the floor. Richard slowly stood up and walked over to Mom. He stood beside her and said, "Let's get a divorce. If we ever have children, I'm afraid you will only blindly favor Leo." My mother was stunned. The news hit her like a thunderclap. She tightly grabbed Richard's pant leg and pleaded, "It won't happen. I swear I won't care about Leo anymore. Please don't divorce me." And Ethan is the top scorer, right? He's also my son, and he brought you honor. If you divorce me, Ethan won't be by your side to honor you. Wouldn't you have raised him for nothing?" Richard's eyes were cold, but his voice was firm as he responded, "I will continue to support Ethan." My mother completely lost her strength, and Leo, like a madman, tried to argue with Richard. The two of them were immediately thrown out by the bodyguards. Richard looked at me with a meaningful gaze and asked, "Do you think I'm being heartless?" I watched them both lose their minds. My eyes growing colder, I replied, "If a person is too greedy, they don't deserve to have everything." My answer was clear, and Richard seemed pleased with my response. When I went to school to register, my mother called me, asking me to send her money. She claimed that over the years, Leo had stolen her little savings and spent it all on tipping Willow the streamer. I wasn't surprised by this news at all. It felt like justice being served. I replied indifferently, "You're no longer my mother. Didn't Dad leave you a house? People shouldn't be so greedy."